The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell starts right now. Hey, Lawrence.
Hey, Jen, we have Andrew Weissman joining us tonight on some of the goings on at the Justice Department. But I really want to thank you for the John Kerry interview. That is exactly who I've been wanting to hear from about this situation. And I've said this many times before. He negotiated with President Obama's guidance what I think is the most important diplomatic accomplishment of our lifetimes, that nuclear deal with Iran, which Donald Trump then ripped up. And we are here tonight because Donald Trump ripped up that deal. And Donald Trump's never going to come close to getting the deal that John Kerry got.
No doubt about it. And I, like you, was so interested in hearing what he had to say about negotiating with the Iranians, with the Israelis, what was possible, and such an important voice. So I'm so grateful he had the time.
And I think he made news with you on the history of Prime Minister Netanyahu's urgings of war with previous presidents. We're going to show that part of it during this hour.
That's right. Was very direct about that as well.
Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Thank you. And so today, April 9th, 2026, at 2:31 p.m., Donald Trump's third wife became the first wife of an American president to say, "I have never been accused or convicted of a crime." And so now Melania Trump has created the lowest standard imaginable for the position of the American First Lady. I have never been accused or convicted of a crime. She also created the single strangest spectacle in the history of White House wives. When White House reporters saw her approaching a White House podium, they had a right to think, wow, that was a very long 2 weeks.
Oh, and by the way, they said my wife, Melania, might have come in illegally. Can you believe that one? No. They said, headlines, maybe she came in illegally, maybe. Let me tell you one thing. She has got it so documented, so she's going to have a little news conference over the next couple of weeks.
That was 10 years ago. And as of this afternoon, Melania Trump still had never given that press conference explaining how she was always in this country legally and how she could possibly have had a legal right to work in this country when she first arrived here. The reporters also had a right to suspect the even longer shot possibility that she was stepping up to the microphone to announce that her 20-year-old son is so different from and so superior to the other Trumps that he has decided to break the Trump family tradition of avoiding military service, and he's volunteering to join the military to participate in his father's war, which is now his father's ceasefire, which Donald Trump has said is a 2-week ceasefire, and we can only hope that it lasts as long as the 2 weeks we have been waiting for Melania Trump's press conference about her immigration status before she married Donald Trump. It is impossible for Donald Trump to know what he's signing because he hates to read, and it is doubly impossible for Donald Trump to know what he's signing when he is signing legislation because it is written in legislative language he could never comprehend. And on December 18th of last year, Donald Trump signed a 1,260-page bill that now makes it impossible for his youngest son to avoid registering for the draft. The Selective Service System, which administers the draft, has announced that they are now in the process of implementing the new law, which will use government records, including Social Security records, to automatically register every American young man between the ages of 18 and 26 to be subject to the draft into military service if the draft is reactivated. Barron Trump was legally required to register for the draft voluntarily 2 years ago when he turned 18 years old. This would be a nice time for the President of the United States to prove that his draft-age son has complied with federal law and did indeed register for the draft within 30 days of his 18th birthday, because failure to do so is a felony. But the act of registering for the draft, which has been entirely voluntary and will remain voluntary until December, when Donald Trump's new law, which you can be sure he has no idea that he signed, takes effect. And of course, there would be no reason for any of us to wonder if Barron Trump has complied with federal law and registered for the draft if his father were not a warmongering politician. There would be no reason for anyone to wonder if Barron Trump committed the felony of failing to register for the draft if his father had not started a war of choice in which he threatened to exterminate 91 million people and their culture, to erase Iranians and Iranian culture from this earth. But Barron Trump's father did do that. And his mother has been completely silent about that war. And she remains silent about it today because she was not stepping up to that microphone to talk about her son's compliance with federal law and his draft status in a time of war. She was stepping up to that microphone to complain about lying, she said, that is, quote, these were her words, devoid of ethical standards, humility, and respect. And she was not talking about her husband. She stepped up to that microphone to defend, quote, my good name. Her name is Trump. And the man who gave her that name destroyed that name a long time ago with a steady stream of racist comments and actions beginning back in the 20th century. With his public confession caught on the Access Hollywood videotape of his preferred method of sexual assault when he meets women, to getting indicted and convicted for falsified business records to pay off a porn star, to unsuccessfully buy her silence about a sexual encounter that she had with Donald Trump in a hotel room while Melania Trump was still nursing her baby boy, who is now eligible for the draft. The good name was gone a long time ago. No one has done more damage to the name Trump than the man she remains married to. It took her 5.5 minutes to read a statement obviously written by her lawyers with possibly some input from her White House staff. And she was there to say, I've never been accused or convicted of a crime. She was there to say that she had no involvement at all with the man who called himself Donald Trump's closest friend for 10 years, Jeffrey Epstein. She said, I have never had any knowledge of Epstein's abuse of his victims. And then she said something very, very strange. She said, I was never involved in any capacity. I was not a participant. A participant in Jeffrey Epstein's crimes? No one has ever suggested that she was a participant in Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking and rape of children, along with his convicted co-conspirator, Ghislaine Maxwell. Why is Melania Trump suddenly saying these things, these strange things? Not a participant. We'll show you video of some of what she had to say today a bit later in our coverage, but what is important about it in the context of today's events is that this is the kind of out-of-control, insane White House Donald Trump is attempting to preside over while he is overwhelmed by what has turned out to be his insane war of choice. Donald Trump is obviously trying to manage his way out of his war without everyone calling it a surrender. The problem is Donald Trump's position in his war now is being called a defeat for Donald Trump from left to right across the political spectrum. And in his panicked management of that situation, his wife stepped up to a microphone today, ending with a demand that Congress invite all of the Epstein survivors to come and testify about their experience, an event that would be Donald Trump's worst Epstein nightmare in Congress. And so in her way today, Donald Trump's wife took her place alongside other right-wing Trump-voting critics of Donald Trump who have now become attackers of Donald Trump because of his war. Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, Candace Owens, Alex Jones, and former Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, who has been using the language about Donald Trump's mental health that we have been using on this program for 10 years. Now Marjorie Taylor Greene sees the madness of Donald Trump. Now Marjorie Taylor Greene sees that he's out of control. And her ability to communicate that to Trump voters in a way that only Trump voters can communicate with each other is harming Donald Trump with his own supporters, and Donald Trump knows it.
How can any person that is mentally stable call for an entire civilization of people to be murdered, to be wiped out, to never come back again? That's what the president called for. And that shows that there's serious instability in his thinking, that he would, not only would he even say that in a private room, perhaps with his advisors, but actually go to his megaphone, his Truth Social, and post that for the entire country and the entire world. And it's unreal. This should never be tolerated. I know it's a very difficult, hard stretch to see it actually coming through, but the conversation needs to be had, and he's out of control, and people within the administration need to step up, take responsibility, and rein this in.
He's out of control. Trump voters can hear that from Marjorie Taylor Greene. She can get Trump voters to actually stop and think about that. And some Trump voters will stop being Trump supporters when they hear her saying things like that. He's out of control. That was 10:30 a.m. today. And as if to prove he's out of control, at 4:28 p.m. today, 2 hours after his wife called for all Epstein survivors to testify to Congress, Donald Trump issued a social media post attacking his former closest supporters, Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, Candace Owens, Alex Jones, Marjorie Taylor Greene, saying they all, quote, have low IQs, they're stupid people. And in a social media post that is 482 words long about Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, Candace Owens, Alex Jones, and Marjorie Taylor Greene, Donald Trump said, quote, nobody's talking about them. The President of the United States is talking about them. The President of the United States talks about them in his longest social media post of his entire war. And while talking about them, he says nobody's talking about them, proving Marjorie Taylor Greene's argument that Donald Trump is not mentally stable, not even close. And that's the kind way of describing Donald Trump's mental condition. And the same out of control, warmongering, war crime threatening, always incoherent rage poster Donald Trump said 415 words into his social media post, I no longer care about that stuff. That's what he said. So after 415 words of caring about it, Donald Trump says, I no longer care. It is now impossible for Donald Trump to not fail a public cognitive test every single time he writes one of these things, every time. Your mind doesn't work if you write 482 words about 5 dear friends of yours who are no longer friends of yours, if you then say, I no longer care. Your mind doesn't work if you write all of that about them, and in the same statement say, no one is talking about that. The President of the United States is talking about that right there. The man whose mind doesn't work is now struggling to restore the world to the condition that it was in before he started his war. If Donald Trump succeeds in his so-called negotiations with Iran, the Strait of Hormuz will be opened, as it was the day before Donald Trump's war. Donald Trump's negotiating position is, let's pretend there was no war. Let's take everything back to the day before the war. That's his negotiating position. Iran's dictatorial theocratic regime will stay in place, as it was the day before Donald Trump's war, with a few new faces, but all the same objectives. Shipping traffic has not resumed in the Strait of Hormuz, although Iranian oil tankers are now passing through the strait so that Iran can sell its oil. The New York Times reports hundreds of ships remained bottled up in the Gulf on Thursday with only a handful passing. And Iran's new Ayatollah, the son of the Ayatollah Donald Trump killed, posted on social media today saying, "We will definitely take the management of the Strait of Hormuz to a new phase." To which Donald Trump said on social media, "There are reports that Iran is charging fees to tankers going through the Hormuz Strait. They better not be, and if they are, they better stop now!" Exclamation point. Or what? We will wipe their civilization off the face of the earth? Donald Trump knows, or should know, that the world knows that his threats are both insane and empty at the same time. His threats in the past have included actual war crimes. It is a war crime to threaten to annihilate a civilization. He's done that already. But his threats are also empty. He's proved that already. And so he might find it a bit harder now to threaten his way to acceptable positions with Iran. CBS News is reporting that several American soldiers injured in Donald Trump's war felt unprepared to defend themselves against an attack at the beginning of Donald Trump's war. CBS News quotes one soldier saying, "We moved closer to Iran to a deeply unsafe area that was a known target," the soldier said. "I don't think there was a good reason ever articulated." Asked to describe the degree of fortification, he responded, "I mean, I would put it in the none category. From a drone defense capability, none. I do think that telling the truth is important, and we're not going to learn from these mistakes if we pretend these mistakes didn't happen," one soldier said. There is nothing more difficult for a president to face and to try to manage than war. We have had good war presidents. We have had great war presidents like Franklin Delano Roosevelt in World War II. And we've had bad war presidents since then during the Vietnam War. And we all know the mistakes made at the presidential level during our 21st century wars in the Middle East. But none of those presidents were trying to manage a war in a White House that was out of control. None of them watched their wives step up to a microphone to say, "I've never been convicted of a crime," while they were trying to manage those wars. None of them had supporters from their own party, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, saying they should be removed from office immediately through the 25th Amendment, and none of them were dragged into wars, including wars they were losing, by a prime minister of another country. Here's what former Secretary of State John Kerry told Jen Psaki tonight about Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu trying to convince a series of American presidents to go to war with Iran.
Yes, he wanted us to strike. He came to President Obama. He made a presentation to ask to strike. President Obama refused. President Biden refused. President Bush refused. The only president who has agreed to this, obviously, is President Trump.
The only one who agreed to wage war, the only one who agreed to wage that war is the one who is out of control. Leading off our discussion tonight is California Congressman Ro Khanna. He's a member of the House Armed Services Committee. Congressman, thank you very much for joining us tonight. This ceasefire is holding as much as we could possibly be expecting it to hold at this point in time. But what has Donald Trump achieved?
Well, he's achieved nothing. And as you put it, he's destroyed one of the greatest diplomatic achievements that Obama and John Kerry had. They had gotten 97% of the enriched uranium out of Iran. Then Donald Trump came in 2018. He ripped the deal up. Then Iran had almost 60% enriched uranium because of Trump ripping the deal up. And then instead of negotiating with Oman, with our European allies, Trump decides he's going to strike Iran. And what have we achieved? Gas has gone up from $2.30 to $4. We've most tragically lost 13 service members. We've replaced Khamenei with Khamenei Jr. Khamenei Jr., unlike his father, actually wants to build nuclear weapons. We've strengthened the IRGC, a more hardline regime in Iran, and we've given Iran more control over the Strait of Hormuz and China more influence over Iran. It's not just the war was illegal and immoral, it was a strategic blunder.
Let's listen to more of what John Kerry had to say tonight about what they actually achieved in that nuclear deal.
We secured an agreement that is the strongest nuclear agreement on the planet, strongest since the 1950s and 60s. We have enormous ability not to trust, but to verify.
And Congressman, I think it's inconceivable that Donald Trump would ever be able to negotiate the actual monitoring system of Iran, which included people in the country with eyes on their nuclear program.
Absolutely. And what's tragic is after all this destruction, after the death of our service members and the death of so many innocent Iranians, we still have not gotten the enriched uranium. By Trump's own admission, it's still buried underneath. What Kerry and under President Obama's leadership had done was they had managed to get rid of 97% of it. They had managed an arrangement where Iran would never have gotten a nuclear weapon for at least 15 years. And they had enforcement. And the only person saying they were cheating was Netanyahu. But the reality is that enforcement was working. Now, Trump could have come and said, okay, I want to go after a tougher agreement and want to build on the work Obama has done. And that would have been fine. But he ripped the whole thing apart. And that was the original sin. And then when he had a second chance at it in this administration, Oman was there trying to say, look, let's get a deal. He again does not take the deal. And he makes matters terrible by this ill-conceived war.
As a member of the Armed Services Committee with jurisdiction over these matters, what's your reaction to CBS's reporting from those soldiers saying that, the injured soldiers saying that we were moved up closer into a vulnerable position without any real defenses, and that's how they got injured?
I'm sickened by it. And what I'm sickened by is the total lack of planning. I mean, I understand when you have these kind of missions that soldiers put their lives at risk and they make the biggest sacrifice. But this president went in without understanding that Iran actually still had ballistic missile capability. They thought they would destroy all of it. And it turns out they were only able to destroy 2/3 and Iran was still able to strike. They underestimated Iran. They underestimated their capability in the Strait of Hormuz. And most unforgivably, they underestimated what it would take to protect our troops. Thank God cooler heads prevailed and it looks like we have a ceasefire because otherwise many more of our troops were going to be at risk.
Congressman Connor, we're going to squeeze in a commercial break here. When we come back, I want to talk about what Melania Trump had to say today. And was this her way of trying to say, please don't call me as a witness in Congress? We'll be right back with Congressman Ro Khanna. Today, Donald Trump's current wife said this.
I never been friends with Epstein. Donald and I were invited to the same parties as Epstein from time to time, since overlapping in social circles is common in New York City and Palm Beach. To be clear, I never had a relationship with Epstein or his accomplice, Maxwell. My email reply to Maxwell cannot be categorized as anything more than casual correspondence. My polite reply to her email doesn't amount to anything more than a trivial note. I am not Epstein's victim. Epstein did not introduce me to Donald Trump. I met my husband by chance at a New York City party in 1998.
The 2002 email that Melania Trump sent to Ghislaine Maxwell shows no indication of being a reply, as she claims it was. But Ghislaine Maxwell's reply to Melania Trump's email does show that that is a reply. Here is Melania Trump's email in full to the convicted sex trafficker, Ghislaine Maxwell, who she says she had no relationship with and was not friends with. Dear G, exclamation point, how are you? Nice story about J.E. in New York Mag, Jeffrey Epstein, that is, in New York Magazine. You look great on the picture. I know you are very busy flying all over the world. How was Palm Beach? I cannot wait to go down. Give me a call when you're back in New York. Have a great time! Exclamation point. Love, Melania. In that 2002 story about Jeffrey Epstein in New York Magazine, Donald Trump said, "I've known Jeff for 15 years, terrific guy. He's a lot of fun to be with. It is even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side." Melania Trump's suggestion today that Epstein survivors testify to Congress got this reply from 15 Epstein survivors. Survivors of Jeffrey Epstein have already shown extraordinary courage by coming forward, filing reports, and giving testimony. Asking more of them now is a deflection of responsibility, not justice. First Lady Melania Trump is now shifting the burden onto survivors under politicized conditions that protect those with power. The Department of Justice, law enforcement, prosecutors, and the Trump administration, which has still not fully complied with the Epstein Files Transparency Act. It also diverts attention from Pam Bondi, who must answer for withheld files and the exposure of survivors' identities. Those failures continue to put lives at risk while shielding enablers. Survivors have done their part. Now it's time for those in power to do theirs. And back with us is Congressman Ro Khanna. Congressman Khanna, you got the Epstein Files Transparency Act passed. You got the files released as much as have been released. What was your reaction to what Melania Trump said today?
There were 4 words that the First Lady uttered that were incredibly important. She said, quote, "Epstein was not alone." And survivors have been texting me about that because, remember, Donald Trump called these survivors a hoax. He has insulted the survivors. And the First Lady is basically acknowledging that there were more men other than Epstein who raped or abused these women. And that means that the entire investigation is legitimate. She needs to call on her husband to get the remainder of the files released. She needs to call on Blanche to have investigations. And the survivors are absolutely right that the burden should not be on them. After you introduced me to Bradley Edwards, they did their part by having 2 press conferences at the steps of the Capitol. They don't need to do more.
So we're running all these photographs here of Melania Trump not being friends with Jeffrey Epstein. That's a picture of her not being friends with Ghislaine Maxwell. We have pictures of her not being friends with both of them. Very important to consider when you consider what she had to say today. So the committee, the Republicans on the committee, subpoenaed and forced former First Lady, former Senator, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton to testify to that committee about Jeffrey Epstein. She had a very simple line of testimony about Jeffrey Epstein, which was, "I have never met Jeffrey Epstein." If the standard for testimony included Hillary Clinton, should Melania Trump be subpoenaed to testify to that committee to say what she apparently was trying to say today under oath with questions?
Absolutely. And here's why it is so relevant, because she's saying that Epstein did not act alone. We need to ask her, who were the other men that she believes may have been involved in raping or abusing these young girls? What did she know? Did she know about any young girls being abused? Did she know of other men talking about the rape and abuse of these young girls? She has relevant information. If she didn't have relevant information, how could she say that Epstein was not acting alone? So it is relevant to the investigation. Hillary Clinton was a total witch hunt, in my view. I mean, I thought President Clinton should have been asked questions, but Hillary Clinton had nothing to do with it. But Melania Trump actually does, and she should come and testify in front of our committee.
Congressman Ro Khanna, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Andrew Weissman joins us next. The New York Times reports the Justice Department has assigned its Civil Rights Division to investigate Cassidy Hutchinson, a former White House aide who outraged Donald Trump 4 years ago after her testimony before Congress implicated him in the violence that erupted at the Capitol on January 6, 2021, according to 4 people familiar with the matter. The inquiry into her was opened in recent weeks as the former Attorney General, Pam Bondi, was trying to shore up her shaky standing with the president, according to 2 other people briefed on the effort. On Tuesday, Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, who was Donald Trump's criminal defense attorney and appears to continue as Donald Trump's criminal defense attorney, said this.
We have thousands of ongoing investigations and prosecutions going on in this country right now. And it is true that some of them involve men, women, and entities that the president in the past has had issues with and that believe should be investigated. That is his right, and indeed it is his duty to do that, meaning to lead this country.
And Todd Blanche gave the most depraved answer imaginable when he was asked if Donald Trump offered him the attorney generalship, would he stay on if he was not offered the attorney generalship? What would he do? Here's what he said.
If he chooses to nominate somebody else and asks me to go do something else, I will say, thank you very much. I love you, sir.
Joining us now is Andrew Weissmann, former FBI general counsel and former federal prosecutor. He is an MS Now legal analyst. And Andrew, I just want to begin with the utter shamelessness, weirdness, twisted beyond description, I love you, sir, that we just heard, and your reaction to it. And if you have no reaction to that, we can move on to legal matters.
Well, I think you have to look at that statement in the context of somebody who has spent his time as the deputy attorney general doing the White House's bidding, and that you don't see what has been true in Republican and Democratic administrations since Watergate, which is the independence of the Department of Justice from the Oval Office. And so that to me is, I read it in that context. If it was said by anyone else in a different context, it might be a little bizarre, but it wouldn't have sort of enough importance for us to be talking about it. But here, I really think that in the position that we're in now, where you have no official confirmed attorney general, I think you're going to see a race to the bottom by the people who are vying for that position, where they're going to be trying to outdo each other in terms of the kind of actions they could take to please Donald Trump, which is exactly the position that you do not want the Department of Justice to be in.
So we have to brace ourselves for a public chorus of "I love you, sirs" from the applicants. Andrew, this investigation of Cassidy Hutchinson, how could it possibly be in the Civil Rights Division?
Well, what I would say, Lawrence, is it's so quaint of you to be thinking about normal rules, and of course it shouldn't be there. And in the same way that if we were talking about, wait a second, why is there even an investigation of somebody like Cassidy Hutchinson? My first reaction was, it's like saying there's an investigation into Jerome Powell, or they tried to indict 6 sitting members of Congress for doing something outrageous, which was speaking to the public truthfully about the military, something that what our actions in Venezuela and Iran suggest that they not only had every right to do, but it was incumbent on them to do it at this time. So it all, to me, as a piece, and just compare what we're hearing about Cassidy Hutchinson with what the administration is doing with respect to Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon was convicted at trial. His appeal of that conviction was denied, and the Department of Justice is moving to dismiss that case, even though the conviction is in hand for doing something which is obstructing Congress. And yet they want to open an investigation and against somebody who's a perceived enemy, with the message being, don't ever come forward and speak about the president in terms of anything that could hurt him.
So, so what can you conceive of what they're thinking about in terms of what they could possibly come up with here and try to stick into an indictment?
Well, she's been attacked already on the whole incident that she said she overheard people talk about what the president of the United States had done on January 6th, wanting to go to the Capitol and turning the car known as the Beast, and trying to get it to go, instead of to the White House, to go to the Capitol, to join the protesters. And there's been a lot of discussion about was that true or not? But what people are forgetting is she's not saying I was in the car and I heard it myself, and other people who were in the car saying that's not what happened. That, by the way, people can misremember things, but that's not even what happened here. She's saying that she wasn't even there, but later somebody who was in the car told her that was what's happening. So how you're going to make some criminal case out of what at best could be a discrepancy seems, to me, it seems just as fanciful as what we've seen with the Letitia James, James Comey, Jerome Powell, 6 members of Congress. I mean, this is a lawless Oval Office and a lawless Department of Justice, where it doesn't take any factual predication to have the story be, we are now putting you under criminal investigation.
Is the Civil Rights Division an indication that other prosecutors who actually would have jurisdiction over something like this, if there was something to investigate, have refused to do it?
That is possible. And we certainly are hearing that there are people like that. For instance, in Minneapolis, the U.S. Attorney's Office there, reportedly, there have been slews of people who were former federal prosecutors who were in the office who said, we are not investigating Renee Good and Renee Good's widow, in this case, when what we should be investigating are the people who shot Renee Good. And so you do see people doing that. I have this feeling that it's much more about Jeanine Pirro not having successfully tackled the Jerome Powell case or the 6 members of Congress, and the head of the so-called Civil Rights Division is somebody who seems to be perfectly happy to do Donald Trump's bidding and is one of the names that is in line for at least being considered for the Attorney General. So has every interest, if you have a lawless Department of Justice, to show that, I can deliver for you the Oval Office rather than for the American people.
Finding another way to say, I love you, sir. Andrew Weissmann, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
You're welcome.
And coming up, The Atlantic says we are in the worst energy crisis the world has ever seen. The worst. That's next. We are living through the worst energy crisis the world has ever seen. Those are the words of our next guest's latest piece in The Atlantic. And today, the British Prime Minister said this.
I'm fed up with the fact that families across the country see their bills go up and down on energy, businesses' bills go up and down on energy because of the actions of Putin or Trump across the world.
And the CEO of Abu Dhabi National Oil Company said today, this moment requires clarity, so let's be clear, the Strait of Hormuz is not open. Access is being restricted, conditioned, and controlled. And tonight, former Secretary of State John Kerry said this in an interview with Jen Psaki.
We've complicated the global economy. People, average folks in our country are paying so much more now for goods, and that inflation will continue even if the war ended tomorrow.
Joining us now is Amos Hochstein, who served as White House Senior Advisor for Energy and the Middle East in the Biden administration. Thank you very much for joining us again tonight. So, the worst energy crisis the world has ever seen. It doesn't feel that way yet in the United States. We're seeing gas prices go up at the pump, but when we say energy crisis, some people go back to those 1970 photographs of cars lined around blocks for, half a mile waiting to get gas at a gas station in America.
Well, it's great to be back. And it is the worst crisis because in the 1970s, when we saw those lines, it was just oil coming through the Strait of Hormuz. But today, we have 5 countries in Asia that have gone to a 4-day work week to conserve energy. They have restricted flights throughout their countries to conserve jet fuel. Airports in Europe are starting to talk about a shortage. This is not a risk of a shortage, it's an actual shortage. And so all those things that we import from other countries are going to come to us. We are blessed with an abundance of oil and gas, but here too, diesel and gasoline prices have gone up. Try to buy a plane ticket today for the months of late April, May, June. You'll see the prices are significantly higher. And there's always a lag. So we announced a ceasefire over 48 hours ago, but the Strait of Hormuz is still closed. No ships have gone through except for maybe 3 or 4. And I think even they were ones that had some port calls in Iran. So really only Iran. And remember, Donald Trump's administration removed the sanctions from Iran during this war. So Iran is now selling oil at extremely high prices, making a fortune. Putin is doing the same because he also got sanction relief. And the rest of the world is getting no oil through the Middle East, no diesel, no fuel, no helium gas, no LNG. And so I'm not really sure why we went to war, but I do know that as a result of the war, we now have a crisis, which is the Strait of Hormuz that was open and free access will probably never go back to that.
I knew nothing about where helium comes from and how helium is actually used in this world until they closed the strait. And then, the second thing I learned was fertilizer. The third thing I learned was helium.
And we use these products. Helium gas is used for so many different things. For example, for when we make semiconductor chips, but it's also used for MRI machines and so on, and hospital goods. Look, these are things that are going to affect us. They just don't happen right away. And the question becomes, where we really have to focus on, before this war, the idea that Iran would shut the straits was always known to us who did war games on Iran, and we planned for it. But it was a theory, a theoretical threat. Now, as Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber, that you quoted at the top, said, the strait is closed and they're charging a toll. So now Iran's regime is still in place. They are more powerful, more emboldened. They still have the ability to fire missiles. And now they're wielding a power over their Gulf state neighbors and over the rest of the world. And we have to do something about that. That is not something that we can just live with, because energy is so critical to everything we do.
Amos Hochstein, thank you very much for joining us again tonight. Thank you. We'll be right back. Amos Hochstein gets tonight's last word.